November 9th, 1989. As jubilant crowds tear down the Berlin Wall, they're not just dismantling concrete and steel, they're marking the end of a philosophical experiment that reshaped nearly half the world's population. But to understand how we got here, we need to rewind. Not just decades, but centuries. Rewind past the Cold War, past the Russian Revolution, past the Industrial Revolution, all the way back to a German philosopher writing in candlelight, trying to make sense of the profound changes sweeping across Europe. The steam engines are roaring to life, the factories are rising from farmland, and the old social order is crumbling. In this moment of transformation, he develops an idea so powerful that it will eventually influence the lives of billions. Think about this. How does a single philosophical framework end up restructuring entire societies, from the streets of Moscow to the farms of China? How does an abstract theory about history and economics become so influential that by 1975, 1/3 of humanity lived under systems shaped by its principles? The story of dialectical materialism is more than just a tale of philosophical debate. It's a journey that takes us from ancient Greek dialectics to modern social movements, from the birth of industrial capitalism to today's technological disruptions. And at its heart lies a deceptively simple question: what really drives human history? As we unravel this story, we'll see how this philosophy shaped education systems, transformed economies, and continues to influence modern movements. We'll discover why some of the world's fastest-growing economies still officially embrace these ideas, while others have rejected them entirely. The numbers tell a striking story. In countries that embrace this philosophy, literacy rates skyrocketed from single digits to near 100% within decades. Social mobility patterns shifted dramatically. Even today, this framework influences how billions of people understand economics, technology, and social change. But to understand how a philosophical idea gains such world-changing power, we need to start at the beginning. And that means traveling back to the intellectual ferment of 19th century Europe, where a radical new way of thinking about history and society was about to emerge. Picture yourself standing on the banks of a river in ancient Greece. The philosopher Heraclitus stands beside you and says, "No one ever steps in the same river twice." This simple observation contains a profound truth that would echo through centuries. Everything exists in a state of constant change, driven by internal contradictions. This idea, that change and contradiction are fundamental to reality, became the foundation of dialectical thinking. But it wasn't until the early 1800s that a German philosopher named Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel would transform this ancient wisdom into a systematic way of understanding how ideas and society evolve. Hegel's insight was revolutionary. He saw that ideas develop through a pattern of contradiction and resolution. Think of it like this. You have a thesis, an initial idea, which inevitably creates its own antithesis, an opposing idea. The tension between these opposites doesn't end in stalemate. Instead, it produces a synthesis, a higher-level understanding that contains elements of both. Let's make this concrete. Consider how our understanding of democracy has evolved. Thesis: ancient Athens develops direct democracy, where all citizens vote on everything. Antithesis: this becomes impossible as populations grow larger. Synthesis: representative democracy emerges, preserving citizen participation while making it workable for large populations. But Hegel believed this dance of ideas was the primary driver of history, that the material world was secondary to the evolution of human consciousness and reason. This is where a young philosopher named Karl Marx would fundamentally disagree. Marx looked at the Germany of his time, where philosophical ideas flourished while millions lived in grinding poverty. He saw the contrast between London's grand philosophical societies and its child laborers working 16-hour days in factories. And he concluded that Hegel's system was brilliant, but inverted, standing on its head. The material conditions of life, how we produce food, clothing, shelter, and other necessities, these weren't just passive backgrounds for the evolution of ideas. They were the primary drivers of historical change. The dance of contradictions happened not primarily in our minds, but in the economic and social relations that shaped how we live. Real numbers tell the story. In 1848, when Marx was developing these ideas, 89% of the British population lived in extreme poverty. The contradiction between rapidly advancing industrial technology and widespread human misery couldn't be resolved through ideas alone. The average factory worker labored 14 to 16 hours per day, while factory owners accumulated unprecedented wealth. But before we explore how Marx transformed Hegel's dialectics into a powerful tool for understanding social change, consider this. How do ideas develop in your own life? Think about a strongly held belief you had 5 years ago that has since evolved or changed completely. What contradictions or real-world experiences forced you to modify that belief? This pattern of ideas colliding with reality, creating tension, and eventually producing new understanding is at the heart of dialectical thinking. And as we'll see, when applied to material conditions rather than just ideas, it becomes a lens for understanding everything from technological disruption to social movements. Imagine walking through a London factory in 1848. The air is thick with cotton dust, the machines deafening. Children as young as 6 work 14-hour shifts, their small hands darting between dangerous moving parts. Outside, entire families live in single rooms, while factory owners build magnificent estates. This wasn't just poverty, it was a transformation of human society more profound than anything since the invention of agriculture. Before widespread industrialization, more than 89% of the British population lived in extreme poverty. Factory workers' wages often left them with barely enough to survive, while factory owners saw their wealth multiply exponentially. According to historical records, the real wage of the average worker wouldn't double until 1851, after decades of industrialization. This was the world that prompted Marx to fundamentally rethink how societies change. While Hegel saw ideas as the primary driver of history, Marx looked at those factory floors and saw something different. The steam engine wasn't just a new idea, it was reorganizing the entire fabric of human society. Marx's innovation was to recognize that our material conditions, how we produce food, clothing, shelter, and other necessities, form the foundation, the base, upon which all other aspects of society, the superstructure, are built. This includes our ideas, laws, culture, and political systems. Consider how the steam engine changed social relations. It created new classes of workers and owners. It transformed family structures as work moved from homes to factories. It reshaped cities as millions migrated from rural areas. It even changed how people understood time itself, as factory whistles replaced natural rhythms. The impact was quantifiable. Between 1760 and 1840, the percentage of people living in cities in England and Wales rose from 17% to 39%. The traditional social order, where craft guilds and agricultural relationships dominated, was completely upended. Think about how this applies to our modern world. When social media platforms emerged, they didn't just provide new ways to communicate. They transformed how we form relationships, how we understand privacy, how we engage in politics, how we work and learn. Just as the steam engine created new social classes of industrial workers and factory owners, today's technological revolution has created new divisions: tech workers, gig economy workers, digital creators, and platform owners. The numbers are striking. As of 2024, the top 1% in Silicon Valley hold 23% of the region's wealth, while 30% of households aren't self-sufficient. This is dialectical materialism in action. Changes in how we produce and interact with the material world drive changes in our social relations, our ideas, and our consciousness. The contradictions this creates between owners and workers, between technological capability and human needs, between individual and collective interests, become the engines of social change. But here's the key insight. Just as factory workers in 1848 couldn't solve their problems through ideas alone, today's social challenges can't be addressed purely through new ways of thinking. The material conditions that shape our lives, who owns the technology, who controls the platforms, how wealth is distributed, these are the fundamental drivers of social change. Consider your own life. How has your relationship with technology changed your social connections, your work life, your understanding of privacy? These aren't just changes in ideas, they're transformations in the material conditions of how we live and interact. Let's rewind to France, 1789. A loaf of bread costs 88% more than it did the previous year. Workers' wages have fallen by 25%. The nobility and clergy, making up just 2% of the population, own 35% of the land, yet pay no taxes. Meanwhile, the educated middle class, the bourgeoisie, has economic power, but no political rights. The French Revolution provides a perfect laboratory for understanding how dialectical materialism works in practice. Here we see the classical contradiction that Marx would later identify: the tension between productive forces and the relations of production. Let's break down the numbers that made revolution inevitable. The Third Estate made up 98% of the population, but owned only 65% of the land. The nobility and clergy paid zero taxes while living in luxury. The cost of living increased 62% between 1741 and 1785. The national debt had ballooned to 1.8 billion livres, largely due to wars. Bread, the staple food, consumed 88% of a worker's wages by 1789. This wasn't just about ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, though these were important. It was about material conditions creating the consciousness that made these ideas revolutionary. When people can't feed their children despite working constantly, when they see wealth concentrated in the hands of those who don't work at all, abstract philosophical concepts become weapons for change. The bourgeoisie, caught between their economic power and political powerlessness, became revolutionary, not because they read Rousseau, but because their material interests conflicted with the existing social order. The peasants joined the revolution, not because of Enlightenment philosophy, but because they couldn't survive under the current system. Fast forward to today. In Silicon Valley, we see similar contradictions emerging. 0.001% of households, just 9 families, hold more wealth than the bottom 440,000 households combined. 30% of households can't meet basic needs despite living in one of the wealthiest regions on Earth. Tech workers create enormous value, but have little control over their work's impact on society. Consider the rise of tech worker organizing. A recent survey found that 72% of tech workers favor unionization. This isn't happening because they suddenly discovered new ideas about labor rights. The key insight here is that social change doesn't come primarily from new ideas dropping into people's heads. Instead, material conditions create the circumstances where certain ideas become powerful forces for transformation. What contradictions do you see in your own economic position? Are you part of the modern third estate, creating value but lacking control? Or are you among those benefiting from current arrangements while seeing their instability? Let's look at Silicon Valley, 2024. 9 households control more wealth than the bottom 440,000 households combined. Nearly half of residents struggle to pay monthly expenses. Tech platforms reshape how billions of people work, think, and interact. Sound familiar? We're watching dialectical materialism play out in real time. Consider how today's productive forces, AI, automation, digital platforms, conflict with existing relations of production. A tech worker can create millions in value with a few keystrokes, yet has little say in how that value is used. Platforms like Uber and DoorDash transform millions into gig workers while concentrating control in algorithmic systems. The contradiction between our technological capabilities and how we organize their ownership and control grows sharper every day. The numbers tell a striking story. 47% of Silicon Valley residents struggle with monthly expenses. 30% of households aren't self-sufficient, despite living in one of the world's wealthiest regions. Social media platforms have nearly tripled their user base from 970 million in 2010 to over 5.17 billion in 2024. 72% of tech workers favor unionization, reflecting growing class consciousness. These aren't just statistics, they're measurements of material contradiction. Just as the steam engine created new classes and conflicts in the 19th century, today's technologies are reshaping social relations in fundamental ways. But here's where dialectical materialism shows both its strength and limitations as an analytical tool. Its strength lies in helping us understand how technological change drives social transformation. When Facebook transforms from a college networking site to a platform that influences global elections, we're not just seeing a company grow, we're watching how changes in productive forces reshape social and political relations. The theory's limitations become apparent when we consider the complexity of modern identity and social movements. While class remains crucial, today's social conflicts often involve intersecting issues of race, gender, environmental concern, and technological access. Take the recent surge in tech worker organizing. In the past 5 years, union membership among tech workers has grown by 9.6%, with over 90 union drives reported. When 67% of tech workers say they would join a union, they're expressing a growing awareness of their position in modern relations of production. The relevance to current social movements is clear. From climate activism to digital rights campaigns, successful movements increasingly focus on changing material conditions rather than just spreading ideas. When climate activists target fossil fuel infrastructure or privacy advocates push for data ownership rights, they're engaging in materialist analysis, whether they know it or not. Do you create content for social media platforms while having no control over their algorithms? Has remote work technology freed you from the office while extending work into your home life? These aren't just individual experiences. They're manifestations of broader contradictions between our technological capabilities and how we organize their ownership and control. Understanding this can help us move from personal frustration to collective action. Critics might argue that dialectical materialism is too reductionist, too focused on economic relations at the expense of other factors. But its core insight, that material conditions shape consciousness and social change, remains powerful. The dance between material conditions and social change continues, perhaps more visibly than ever in our digital age. How would Marx analyze platforms like TikTok or Instagram? Think beyond their role as communication tools. What new social relations do they create? What contradictions emerge when algorithms designed for engagement collide with human needs for genuine connection? Consider how these platforms simultaneously connect and alienate us. We live in an era of unprecedented technological capability, yet billions struggle to meet basic needs. Silicon Valley creates tools that could liberate human potential, while 30% of its own residents can't achieve self-sufficiency. When we see tech workers organizing for ethical AI guidelines or users demanding control over their data, are we watching the early stages of new contradictions seeking resolution? What happens when the tools of production become primarily digital? Dialectical materialism suggests that while ideas matter, they gain revolutionary power only when they connect with material conditions. Do you agree? Remember, as you navigate an increasingly complex digital world, understanding the relationship between material conditions and social change isn't just philosophical exercise. It's a practical tool for making sense of our rapidly transforming society.